Hi guys. Okay, so this is going to be the first of at least 2, maybe 3 lectures on Kant. I'm going to try to keep these as short as possible. I'm really aiming for 20 minutes, no more than a half hour. Almost surely we'll go over that because it's just impossible. I plan these lectures. Kant we're going to spend 6 hours on, right? Two class periods. So just a lot of material. But I want to make sure that these are broken up shortly, short enough rather that actually watch them and find them useful. And also Kant is just incredibly complicated. And for some of the stuff I'll need like a whiteboard. I'll use my kids' little IKEA chalkboard on one side and there's a whiteboard on the other. And I thought about doing a PowerPoint, but it's just I didn't think it looked right, and I couldn't manipulate it quite as quickly as you can just writing things down. And sometimes I kind of want to go back and forth between things and sort of saying, okay, go back to the next slide now in the PowerPoint. It just wasn't very organic. So this will be a lecture on some of the stuff in the preface from the Prolegomena, and then some of the, as it were, the major moves Kant is going to make. And then the next lecture, and if need be, the third, will be on, as it were, the particulars, right? So if you want, this lecture is going to be the forest, and then the next lecture, and maybe the third, if necessary, will be about the trees. So the particulars, that sort of thing. Okay, so first off, the title of the work itself needs a little bit of explanation, right? The word prolegomena, it's Greek. It means preamble, or the introductory material, building blocks, even if you want. It comes from the word in Greek, legomena is the past participle of the verb legein, which means to speak or to read, actually. It's related to lectura in Greek, in Latin, which means to read or to choose. So, and the word logos actually comes from it. So that very important Greek word used in the Bible. In the beginning, there was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. In arche, he, logos. It's also a very important word in Plato. It means account there. So when Socrates asks for an account of someone's belief or their argument, he's asking for a logos. So anyway, so prolegomena, pro meaning before, and legomena meaning the things that have been said, or something like that. So it's the sort of, you can see it's the foregoing remarks, the opening remarks. So that's what the word means. It's a word that you should never use. And if you see somebody use it, it should be a red flag. It means probably they're just trying to sound smarter. They're trying to find a fancy schmancy word. And I say that sincerely. If you're writing something that's technical or theoretical, complicated, it's hard enough. Don't make your reader also have to look up a Greek word where there are 10 English words that'll work just as well. So I think, if you find anyone in the 21st century saying prolegomena to X, roll your eyes and, maybe think real hard about whether you have to read this. Well, forgive Kant, because he was writing this was published in the end of the 18th century, so, maybe this was a little more in currency then, although I don't really see many other people using it. I don't know off the top of my head really any major texts from the 16th, 17th, or 18th century that use the term. So anyway, so it means introduction, preliminary remarks, something like that. And to any future metaphysics, that should be clear enough anyway. So what he thinks the work is going to do is set the groundwork, or frame, if you like, any metaphysical project, any attempt that someone after him will use in metaphysics. So in other words, he thinks if you want to do metaphysics from here on out, you should start with these prolegomena, with this introduction, with these preliminaries, something like that. So that's what the title of the work means. What is metaphysics itself? Boy, that's a question that I have avoided in our class because it's not clear, to be honest with you. Descartes' Meditations, the full title is Meditations on First Philosophy. Aristotle, in his work called The Metaphysics, which he did not title that work Metaphysics. It was called Metaphysics by later either scribes or librarians. We're not really sure. It's ancient. We know that. It's from the 1st century BC, somewhere right around there. But the Greek for it is ta meta ta physica, right? And Greek uses a lot of particles in a way that English doesn't. So ta meta, that normally wouldn't be there in English. That's why we take the ta out, and then ta physica, we take that out. So we just get metaphysica, right? And that's what translates into metaphysics. But anyway, that's the way Greek does it. But in the Metaphysics, Aristotle calls metaphysics first philosophy. So you can see in Descartes' Meditations on first philosophy could just as well have been titled Meditations on Metaphysics, or Metaphysical Meditations, if you want to call it that. I'm not going to get too into the weeds here. I would have in our lecture in person, but again, I'm trying to cut these as short as possible. But for our purposes, metaphysics, for someone like Kant is, and to some extent someone like Descartes as well, is going to be centrally a question of a science, if you want. I mean, Kant explicitly uses that term, science, Wissenschaft, in German. That's a technical term, Wissenschaft. I mean, literally, the word wissen comes, and it's the verb to think, and Schaft, it's work. So it's mind work, right? Literally, what the word Wissenschaft means. But it's a technical term in German, and it can be applied to things like chemistry, biology, so forth. For Kant, he takes it to be a science in a robust sense, the study of what exists, what is there in the world, so ontology, and a question of ontology. And sort of related to that, however, and this is a little more ancient, this is the way the ancient Greeks would have thought of it too in the medievals, is not merely just what exists, but also how it is we can come to know what those things are. What are the means by which we come to knowledge of the things that exist. So in Kant's usage, in Descartes' usage, in Aristotle's usage, in the medieval usage, metaphysics was a study not only of what we would today call metaphysics, but also epistemology. Right. So we've sort of broken those two up more in the late 19th into the early 20th century and on. But certainly for Kant, metaphysics would have encompassed both what we nowadays consider metaphysics, but also questions of epistemology, how it is that we come to know that these things exist, what they are, that sort of thing. Okay. I should say, because Kant is using this word Wissenschaft, science, Kant started out as a scientist. He was published and had done work in astronomy. His dissertation was, or what we would call his dissertation today, which was published, is I believe it's called on the Metaphysical Foundations of Natural Science or something like that, or the Metaphysics of Natural Science, but I can't remember exactly. But it's a work on what we would today consider, or what we would call thermodynamics and geology, sort of a mixture. I mean, the central question of his dissertation was, why is the Earth so hot? By which he means, the question was this: look, we know how much energy the sun produces, or at least how much energy the sun gives to the planet. They had known that. That was the sort of thing that they could test. We know that that's not enough energy to account for all of the heat on the planet. In other words, if the only source of heat from the on Earth were the sun, then we would basically live in a snowball. And yet we don't. So that's a mystery, right? That was, or at least certainly it was in the mid 18th century when Kant was defending his dissertation. Of course, he didn't know about plate tectonics. That wasn't until the late 19th century that was first postulated, and I don't know when it was actually proved. Probably early 20th century sometime. And so, and because he didn't know about plate tectonics, he thought it was a question of thermodynamics, which was a relatively new study in the 18th century. and it wasn't the laws of thermodynamics weren't developed, I believe, until the mid 19th century. But so it's starting to come along. So even though his theories are inaccurate, he's nonetheless trying to answer this question that wouldn't be answered for another 150 years. Anyway, so he is a scientist of the highest caliber. He would have been a person of consequence, even had he never done any philosophy. He would have been remembered. So he's just a super smart guy, stupidly smart. That's probably why he's such a bad writer. His scientific interests are part of what led him into philosophy. He was, as with Hume, although I think probably more accurately than Hume, as we discussed in class, Hume sort of sees himself in this Newtonian, Baconian mode, that is picking up the methods of Bacon, Francis Bacon, and Isaac Newton. But as I'd sort of suggested, and certainly as we'll see when we get to Thomas Reid, there's some questions there. How faithful was he to the Newtonian method? That sort of thing. Well, Kant, being a practiced scientist in a way Hume wasn't. Hume never really officially studied anything like science. Hume's education was initially just a sort of standard liberal arts education. He was expected to go to law school, and he decided not to. At a young age, he wanted to write. He was really interested in literature, which is, if you remember, you see how many literary references are in his work, particularly to classical writers. Diodorus Siculus, I forget exactly how to pronounce his names, shows up a lot. Cicero, of course, Virgil, Homer, so forth. But he never really studied science as such. He just wasn't something that he was interested in at the time. So maybe we'll forgive him a little bit for not fully understanding what Newtonian or Baconian methods were. For Kant, that's not the case. So Kant understood physics at the time very, very well. And what he took to be a problem was, with Newtonian physics particularly, is that so far as he could tell, and this was widely accepted at the time, it was not universally accepted, but it was widely accepted that Newtonian mechanics was determinist, right? As it were, the universe was closed. There's no room for freedom, right? In other words, when you roll a ball down a plane and it hits another ball, that second ball moves. Well, the first ball has no control over its direction. It has no control over its velocity, its force, all that sort of thing. And the second ball doesn't either, right? It's going to get hit regardless, right? And a lot of people thought at the time that all of the universe was this way. So you get Laplace, who was a French scientist, roughly contemporary with Kant, a little bit younger, who thought that if somebody had the mind, the talent, and the time, he could figure out everything that was ever going to happen in the universe. He'd have to know all of the current causes. it's a theoretical thing. It's impossible. But if you knew everything in all the cosmos that was happening now, so the position and the velocity of all particles, of all bodies, then you could, in principle, Laplace thought, figure out everything that was ever going to happen in the future. Right? That's a sort of when I say closed and deterministic. Right? Kant was a little worried by this position, because he thought, among other things, in order for ethics to carry out, in order for people to be held responsible for their actions, they have to be free to choose those actions or to forbear from choosing them. And on a Newtonian account, that doesn't seem to be possible. So it's sort of concerns like that got him from science into philosophy. And a major turning point for him was when he picked up, and he says this explicitly in the Prolegomena, when he picked up Hume's inquiry. As he says, Hume awoke me from my dogmatic slumbers. Dogmatic. Before this, he was the follower of a guy named Christian Wolff, which we're not going to get into any of that, but he sort of accepted Christian Wolff's teachings from a young age, largely because he was raised in a German pietist, religious movement that was started by and greatly influenced by Christian Wolff. And Wolff himself was not only a theologian, I shouldn't say merely, wasn't only a theologian, he was also a philosopher in his own right. So Kant had sort of grown up in that milieu and had sort of just accepted it. He suggests dogmatically, man, that's a little unfair. I mean, and presumably, I mean, he's a smart guy, right? So he's the sort of person very unlikely to accept these positions without having thought through them, attempted to defend them, and so forth at all. Nonetheless, he certainly read Hume and immediately saw like this is profound stuff and raises really difficult problems that what I've accepted before is entirely unequipped to handle. So he credits Hume terrifically for sort of turning him towards the philosophy that he's now famous for, which is called his critical philosophy. Critical here meaning not critical in the way we use the word, like if you're critical of somebody, right? Critical here, critique, coming from the Greek word to mean to judge. I forget off the top of my head if it's kritos or kritikos. Kritikos wouldn't make sense. I think it's probably kritos in Greek, which was just the word for judge. And then various, that comes from verbs that mean to judge, and that things like that. Right? That's so the critical period. It's not critical in the sense of being critical of something. It's critical in the way that when you were in math classes in high school and you did critical thinking exercises, right? And they always just seemed to be word problems. I never understood why they were called critical thinking exercises when it was just math with words instead of symbols. But whatever. But what is critical thinking, right? It's analysis. It's analyzing concepts, analyzing what's being said, and in a way that's not just cursory, right? It's analyzing these concepts in a way whereby you can understand what they mean and then work with them in a really meaningful way and enter into dispute with them or affirmation, that sort of thing. So that's what critical means. And it's called his critical period because what Kant thinks he's going to have to do in order to overcome this Humean skeptical problem. Kant is bothered by Humean skepticism, particularly with regard to cause and effect, again, as he says explicitly in the preface to the Prolegomena. Again, think about Hume. If causal relations don't exist, well then, if we can't know that they exist, well then all of science is out the door, right? The most we can say about science is that, well, it just seems to be the way we've been habituated to think about the world or something. Okay, but that's not knowledge, right? I mean, as Hume suggests, and Kant thinks he's right about that. That can't be knowledge. So how do we overcome this Humean skepticism? Kant thinks the way to do that is by a critical examination, the critique again, this sort of critical in this more robust sense, this deep analysis of reason itself. He suggests in another work called The Critique of Pure Reason, critique there being used again in this critical sense, that in order to know whether a thermometer works, you're looking at the thermometer, you want to see whether it's telling time. Well, time. Oof, boy. Apparently, I don't know how a thermometer works. If you see if it's reading the temperature well, what you have to do is, if you really want to understand it, you have to make sure the instrument's working, right? You have to make sure that the mercury is tainted. I don't know if actually would happen, but you get the point, right? I mean, in order to know whether a device or a tool is working well, you have to investigate it. And Kant thinks that we need to enter into this deep investigation of reason itself in order to first see whether it's possible to circumvent this Humean skepticism, and then, if it is, spoiler alert, he thinks it is, then to see how we go about doing that. The word pure in there, reine, in German, what Kant means by that is when he's going to talk about pure X, so the critique of pure reason, you'll see in the Prolegomena, I have you read parts of the first chapter, which is how is pure mathematics possible, right? So you see pure mathematics. So what is pure mathematics as opposed to just regular mathematics, right? Okay. Whenever he uses pure in that sense, what he means is considered apart from experience itself. So pure reason then is reason considered on its own, unadulterated by experience as such. Okay. Now that should give you a hint then, well, wait a minute, if pure reason is unadulterated by experience, and that must mean regular reason, the reason that we come to engage the world with is not pure, thereby it is mixed with experience, right? And the answer to that question is absolutely yes. For Kant, experience itself is, as it were, always engaged with reason. Right, so remember with Hume I had suggested that the way we should consider impressions, and this is why I didn't, remember when I said that for Hume the word impression can mean experience? I mean, it's sort of that's a heuristic, if you like. It's a quick way of thinking about Hume, remembering terms and so forth. But I said, but the word experience can mean different things to different people, to different thinkers, and this is kind of what I was trying to hedge my bets here, because Kant is going to use. A Kantian understanding of reason is very different from a Humean. Remember, for Hume, you are a passive agent for experience, right? You open your eyes, I'm looking around the room, all of this stuff is just sort of washing over me, entering my eyes, entering my ears, my nose, my mouth, sort of when I rest my hand here, like my hand is just sort of this passive recipient to the softness of the denim of my jeans and stuff like that. Right, so for Hume, remember I think I used the term bare or naked even. These experiences are just these raw, bare, naked phenomena that are just washing over you, and then the mind has got to work with all of that, and it's a cacophony, right? I mean, it's just crazy, all of the stuff going on, and so the mind then goes to these three associations of ideas. Remember, resemblance, contiguity of space and time, and cause and effect, in order to help you make sense of the madness, right? Okay. Well, for Kant, he also thinks that there's madness out there, that there's a cacophony, a panoply of experiences washing over us. But he thinks that Hume's picture here of having the mind collate all of these experiences along with ideas along these associative lines, that's just not gonna work. It's not gonna happen quickly enough. That is to say, the mind would have to experience so much in order to meaningfully associate experiences and ideas along these lines, that it would take too many experiences than one could ever experience in a lifetime, right? I liken it to, and if we were in class, I would do this for you. So one of my favorite bands is the Talking Heads, and they're huge in Japan. And there's a song that they have. One of their entire albums was recorded into Japanese. Maybe many of them, but the one I know of. And so what I do is I have you play. I have you listen to a song in Japanese, not the whole thing, but enough of it, and then I ask you, what do you think it's about? And of course no one knows. It's freaking Japanese, right? And presuming no one in the class knows Japanese, right? But then I say, okay, well, what about this? What if I let you listen to anything ever recorded in Japanese, right? And you can't watch any videos, but you can listen to the audio of those videos. We'll just take the video portion out or cover the screen or whatever. How long would it take you to learn Japanese, or more importantly, just to learn what this first song is about, if you just listened to anything that's ever been recorded in Japanese? How long would it take you, right? Probably forever. Right? I mean, if you're a child, that's would come pretty quickly. But I mean, I'm saying here we are in class, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. You will do nothing for the rest of your life than just listen to Japanese music, poetry, movies, whatever. Just listening. How long would it take you to learn? Oof. I mean, I think the vast majority of us wouldn't. I know a lot of languages. I'm pretty decent with languages. I know to a moral certitude I wouldn't be able to. Most of us, I mean, those of us who are maybe particularly subtle with languages might be able to start to pick up certain grammatical patterns. You might notice that certain words often appear at the beginning of a sentence or a clause, in other words, at the end. You might start to be able to pick out what are called kernels in linguistics, certain kernel usages in the grammar, but to learn the content, I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible, but geez Louise, it would take a long time. Probably most of us couldn't do it, right? That's the sort of thing Kant's got going on. He just thinks that the Humean picture, just having these images pass through us and then having, all these phenomena just washing over us and having the mind collate, that's like listening to all the Japanese that was ever recorded, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and then figuring out pretty quickly, like, oh, that's that word, that means this sentence means this because of the grammatical and syntactical structure of the language, blah, 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 blah. Right? How long would that take you? Well, probably more than one lifetime, right? And yet, and Kant's going to point out, yeah, but, I mean, kids do this. Children, right? So obviously it doesn't take a lifetime, right? So then the picture's got to be incorrect, right? Okay. So Kant thinks the way, as it were, around that, he's going to stipulate, is that reason is there at the moment of the experience itself, forming the experience itself. So experiences are made coherent not after the fact by recourse to these associative properties that the mind is collected, but rather reason is there at the beginning, forming, molding the experience such that by the time it gets to our mind, it's something we can already recognize and work with. Okay, so that's going to be his overall picture, right? And it's going to turn out that, I mean, he's going to call these things pure intuitions. So the word intuition for Kant, and this is really important when you're reading Kant, the word intuition for us, means something like a mother's intuition, right? Like I woke up, I felt like something was wrong, I had an intuition, then I turn on the news, and it turns out that my neighbor's barn, burned down or something like that, and you go, see, I had an intuition, right? That is not what Kant means. Okay, the word is Anschauung in German, and it means to see, or to behold. It's sort of a normal verb for seeing, for sight. It's common in certainly, at least in Indo-European languages, that we attach thinking verbs. We use our thinking. When we're speaking about thinking, we use visual imagery a lot. In English, we'll even say, if someone's explaining something to you, you go, "Oh, I see," right? Well, that's the same for a lot of languages. It's true in Greek. The word theorein, from which we get the word theory, was originally it was a sight word. It was an older usage of theorein was to see something, right? So in a sense, Kant's sort of engaging in that tradition by using a sight word, Anschauung, to mean intuition or to intuit something. Why it's translated as intuition into English, I don't know, to be honest with you. Certainly it's not there in the German. I can't say. My only guess is that the word intuit, the word itself comes from Latin, intuitio, and it was this mental process by which you came to knowledge immediately, without having to engage in discursive reasoning, right? So in other words, sometimes the way you come to know something is by looking for evidence or reading premises, right? And then sort of getting everything together and going, oh, I get it. Now let's see, because of X, Y, and Z, this must be the case. We don't do that with all things, right? Some things we just seem to come to know intuitively, just sort of immediately. So the law of non-contradiction seems to be this way, right? I know that if that guy over there is my friend, then he can't be in China right now, right? Because he's human, and humans can't bilocate. It's impossible. So anything that's bilocating isn't human. He's human, so he's not bilocating. So he's here, he can't be in China, right? That sort of thing. Like the immediate, it's just sort of, I don't need an argument for that, right? I mean, if I say, hey, that's John, and he goes, and my buddy goes, oh, so John's not in China, huh? I guess not. He's right there. And he goes, well, how do you know that? And my friend goes, how do you know he's not in China right now? what argument am I going to produce that's going to convince him, right? And he's confused. I'm just like, friggin' right there. That's how I know, right? So that sort of knowledge that's a terrible example. But the idea is that certain things, this word intuition used to mean way back, knowledge that we could get in a non-discursive way. Things that are just kind of obvious to you or clear to you, okay? Maybe that's why this word Anschauung is translated as intuition, because it will turn out that for Kant, experiences of things, we can know certain things without discursive reasoning at all. In fact, the very important questions that he's going to try to address in response to Hume are the sorts of things, as it were, we can know intuitively, that is, without discursion. Those things are, cause and effect. Turns out, right? Now notice, if it's true, so I'll use this example with my friend, there's no argument I can adduce to explain to my buddy how I know that John's not in China when we both see him right there. That's going to, what I mean by that, I could try to produce arguments. I could say, well, look, people can't bilocate, and he's right here. Let's ignore Jesus for a moment. Jesus seems to have bilocated in the New Testament, so let's, he muddies up the waters a bit. But anyone not named Jesus, right? So you've got, my buddy John here. Now, I could give an argument, right? But is that going to be clearer to most people, right? Oh, I get it. No, humans can't bilocate, so that must be John, right? Most people just see John, like, oh yeah, he's not in China, I guess, and he was right here, right? It's just, no argument's going to be more convincing than the evidence already in front of me, right? And I just sort of immediately accept it, right? But notice, because of that, and you actually will see this again with Reid. Reid makes a very similar point, only he makes it more explicitly. I think I'm doing a lot of speculating here on Kant's behalf to try to make sense of why this word is translated the way it is. So much for keeping this short and cutting out the dross. But Kant's going to point out, as what would suggest, certainly Reid makes this point explicitly, that certain things that are known in that way and sort of intuitively, there are not sorts of things that are open to rational scrutiny. It's just a category mistake. You'll just be engaging in the wrong sort of method by attempting to do that. And if that's the case, well, then little wonder you're going to come up with crazy and false ideas, right? If you use an improper method to try to answer a question, then little wonder you're going to come up with confused and zany and ultimately false conclusions, right? It's like trying to dig the foundations of a house using a tack hammer, right? Well, dude, if that's all you were thinking about, well, we would forgive you for thinking this is impossible, right? Like the house just can't go into the ground. It's going to have to sit on top of it, right? But if someone who knew what the hell he was talking about would be like, just use the right tool, man. Like, yeah, it is impossible if you go about it that way. That's the wrong way to go about it, right? This is going to ultimately suggest, again, not in so many words, Reid will be more explicit about this, but Reid and Kant in some ways are very different, but in some ways are very similar, and you would expect this. Both credit Hume on more or less the same exact point, namely the skepticism about causal relations and so forth. They both credit Hume on that question as the impetus for taking up their project. So then little wonder, even though they're very different, little wonder that at times they're going to agree, even though they surely didn't read each other. Kant almost surely never read Reid. We know Reid never read Kant. We know that. We're pretty certain that Kant never read Reid. Anyway, what's the point? So Kant's going to suggest, and he does this sort of obliquely in the preface to the Prolegomena, that Hume's problem was that, as it were, he was using reason incorrectly, expecting that reason would be able to investigate things in a way, according to a method, that was inappropriate. Now, Kant suggests that's fine. Hume was a genius, so it's not like I'm blaming Hume here. In fact, in many ways, I'm grateful to him for really sort of directing me to the central problems that need to be studied, right? But nonetheless, he does think that Hume has made a fundamental mistake here. Okay, so what is the Kant's ultimate project? What are we going to be getting into in the Prolegomena here? Kant is going to suggest, again, like I've already said, that reason plays a role at the level of experience, not afterwards. I mean, it also plays a role afterwards, but it's there at the moment, forming our experiences in a way that is not only recognizable but is coherent to the mind. So that means that there are going to be conditions of experience that are present in the experience but are not, how do I want to say this? They're present in the experience, but they're not in the experience itself. What do I mean by that? These are going to be conditions that have to be there in order for an experience to make sense to us at all, but they're not the sort of things that you'll be able to see or taste or touch or smell or something like that. So they're conditions upon which, they're the foundations upon which our sensations are possible at all. If you remember way back to Descartes, when we read the third meditation and Descartes was talking about innate ideas, do you remember I wrote on the board a very important word? I said, this is a Kantian word. This is not a word Descartes would use. But I said, this is the way Descartes' thinking, even though he doesn't use these words. Remember, it was things like shape and depth and magnitude. Do you remember all this? And remember I said, Descartes' not claiming that there are red circles bopping around in our minds at birth. He's not claiming that. It's just manifestly false. He knew that. He was a pretty gifted scientist as well. And even anatomist. He was one of the reasons guys like Boyle were able to figure out blood pressure, or, that blood is circulated through the veins, and was that Boyle? I think it was Boyle, or maybe he was the one who figured out blood pressure. Anyway, the point is, Descartes knew that it's not the case that we're born with the concept of a red circle in our mind. Remember what I said, however, is that these innate ideas serve as conditions that make thinking possible at all, right? You don't have thoughts of bodies without extension already present, right? Do you remember that when I was going through this? And I said, this is pretty Kantian, and I gave you a big word, transcendental conditions. You remember that? Well, here we are, right? I gave that to you so you'd have a little taste of a Kantian term, such that by the time we got to Kant, you would at least have had some, at least it was sort of in there, right? Well, here we go. These transcendental conditions are the thing I'm talking about, the things that are present in experience but not there, and they're not the object of experience. Maybe that's a good way of saying it. They're present in the experience but they're not the object of it. That is to say, when you are seeing something, you're seeing me right now, right? These conditions are present but you're not seeing them. What you're seeing is me, right? So they're there already in the experience itself, but they're not the sorts of things that you're experiencing. They're not the object of your experience. I am, right? So Kant wants to suggest that the way to get around this Humean problem is to understand the nature of experience in this way, and then he's going to go through and give you some candidates for these transcendental conditions, what he calls pure intuitions. Again, pure intuitions. These are intuitions like experience. Like the things that we experience, the experience of seeing me here, the experience of tasting whatever it is you had for lunch, that sort of thing. But it's pure, so it's unadulterated by experience. And you go, well, how the hell can we have an intuition if I've just defined it in this way as the experience of things that we have, which isn't itself adulterated or mixed with experience? Well, because these are intuitions that are there, present in all experience, but not the object of experience. That's how you get around that problem. It's the conditions. In the same way I used this house example earlier. Well, a bad example because I'm in a basement. So, but if you're in the top story of a house, you don't see the foundation. It's not there, but it's gotta be there, right? Otherwise, the house would collapse on itself, right? So the foundation's there. It's present. It's doing its work, but you can't see it. Without it, you wouldn't have a house, right? Well, likewise with pure intuitions, they're there. Without them, you would not have the intuitions, the experiences that you have. But yet you can't see them. You can't experience them as such, okay? So that's what he's getting at, and those are called transcendental conditions. And that's basically Kant's project. Kant wants to look at experience, wants to look at science, and he's going to suggest, how is that possible? No one doubts that experience is a thing. We all know that. Now the question is, how is it that we can experience something at all? Not how is it that I can experience this thing, There are conditions that must be met in order for you to experience seeing me right now. I have to be alive. I have to actually be here doing this. Your eyes have to be working in the right way. I have to be in a well-lit room. All these sorts of things. Those aren't the sorts of conditions he's asking. He's asking, what are the conditions necessary for you to experience what you're experiencing right now? He's taking a step back and taking it at an even more abstract level. What conditions have to be in place for us to have experiences at all? The sorts of experiences we have. That's called a transcendental project or a transcendental method. And that's because what he's doing, remember that word transcendental means a transcendental condition is a condition that must be necessary in order for something else to occur, right? So he's asking what conditions must be present, what we would call those conditions transcendental. What transcendental conditions must already be there in order for us to be able to have any experiences at all, for us to be able to do science at all, that sort of thing. Okay, so that's going to be his project. What are those transcendental conditions? Well, we're only going to study 2 of them because going too much more in depth, it gets to be really difficult, and even more so now that this is not in person. They're going to be, I can tell you, the 2 pure intuitions we're going to be dealing with are space and time. And he's going to go through, he's not just going to stipulate this, he's actually going to give arguments for this. He's going to suggest to you, I know that space and time serve as transcendental conditions. He will give arguments in this effect, and that's what we'll go to in the second lecture or the third. And now I'm already seeing at 41 minutes, so this is almost surely going to require a third lecture. I'll just say that now. But he doesn't just stipulate, space and time, those sound like good transcendental conditions, and hey, if we just go from there, then great. Now we can trust in cause and effect. That's a leap that's incredibly unjustified. He's going to give arguments. He's going to suggest, I know, and here's the evidence for the case that space and time are transcendental conditions. But I can at least give you a little flavor of that before we get into it. Any experience you've ever had, any experience, take any one you like, occurred at a time and occurred within space. Right? That's just obvious. Right? Because part of thinking about an experience is to, as it were, remembering back, right? Well, that's a temporal thing, right? And then also location. Where did it happen? Right? What day or whatever, right? So Kant says, all experiences are spatio-temporal, and yet we don't experience space as such. We don't experience time as such. What would it look like to see, taste, touch, smell, or hear space? What would it be like to taste, touch, see, hear, or smell time? Right? Obviously, we don't do those things. Right? So that's what I'm talking about. Like, space and time are present in every experience. How do we know that? Oh, no, he's going to give other arguments, too. He'll give arguments to prove that this has to be the case. But even at this point, we can say, how do we know that all experiences are in space and time? Try to imagine an experience you've ever had that isn't. What would that be like? Right? This is impossible even to imagine. Right? So all experiences are at a certain point and located at some certain point, right? So that's going to be his position, and that's where we're going to stop. By the way, we're not going to go any farther. But then he's going to do the same sort of thing for cause and effect, among other things. That's going to be his basic method. Then he's going to have to go through and prove that causal relations are the sorts of things that, we don't experience them, but they're the condition. It's a condition that must be in place in order for us to have experiences in the way that we do. So anyway, this is the introduction to Kant. Like I said, he's super tough. Had I known that we were going to end up doing this online, I probably would have cut Kant. Here we are. I can't. So don't hesitate, guys, to send any questions. Call me, email me, text me. I'm here for you. Like I said, we're going to do another one. There's a lot of big words when you open up the prolegomena: a priori, a posteriori, cognition, synthetic judgments, analytic judgments. Or is it? I'd have to go back through and look again off the top of my head. It might be a priori, a posteriori judgments and analytic synthetic cognition. I can't remember. I'll have to go back and look. Anyway, the point is, there are a lot of these terms that are just going to be obscure, and they would be even if Kant were a good writer, which he's not. So, but I'm here for you guys. I'm gonna have my trusty whiteboard and I'll try to make some pictures and whatnot, and we'll get through this. So I hope you guys are doing well. I miss you. I really do. I really miss teaching. I mean, I love it. I love it. I really enjoy it a lot. I hope that shows in the classroom, but I really do miss it. So, and I miss you guys too. You guys are a lot of fun. It's a great class. So, I hope you're well, and I'm going to go try to upload this now. It takes like hours to upload. I don't know why, but here we are. All right, hang in there, guys.